Right, hello everyone. So we are going to talk today about a couple of different design strategies. I suppose that's the best way of thinking of them. So we are going to talk today about three of them. Three most common ones, I suppose. Listen, there's lots of them out there, but today we're going to have a look at Agile versus Waterfall versus Scrum. Okay, so they're the three we're going to have a look at. We have a look at Agile first of all. So I do a lot of talking, very little writing, because we could write all day about these. There's plenty of YouTube clips that'll show you. We're on YouTube. There's plenty of information there out of them, but I'm going to kind of have a look at pros and cons of each and the basic kind of functionality each. So I'll come back to this one at the end, and we'll kind of do a kind of synopsis. So the first one we're going to have a look at really is Agile. Okay, so Agile. So what is Agile? I suppose that's probably the first thing you're asking. Okay, Agile development, software development is it's incremental, but most importantly, it's iterative. Okay, so it's cyclical. It goes round in a circle. Okay, so instead of planning at the very start, in-depth planning on the project, Agile methodologies are kind of open to changing the requirements over time, and what they usually involve is constant feedback into the process. Okay, tweaking basically. It requires cross-functional teams. In other words, group subsets within a larger team where each person has multiple skill sets to allow this iterative process to continue. The leadership in these agile methodology encourages teamwork, accountability, face-to-face communication. In other words, they would use a lot of technologies like Slack or GitHub in order to pool data as they're going along, so everyone in the group knows what everyone else in the group is kind of doing at the one time, so there's no kind of information void from one area to another. Okay, it was built in around, it was first developed around the early 2000s. Suppose the advantages of it is the idea that change, okay, change is embraced. Okay, it's as simple as that. You if something needs to be tweaked, then you don't fight it, you go with it. Okay, it embraces change. Okay, you don't need an end goal. It's more of a go with the flow type of idea. So you have a kind of a concept that you want to do something, but as the iterative process continues and continues, you might end up somewhere else where you think you should go, but that's okay. There's no real fixed end goal. It's definitely faster. Okay, because you have multiple teams working on things at the same time, and because they're cross-pollinating each other, the agile methodology does allow for a faster development process. Okay, and then of course it builds strong teams. So it means that when you do move on to the next project, you do have more skill sets being built up. Now, ideally, if we had been doing computer science the way it's been intended to at the Leave Cert, then from the start of first year or start of fifth year, you would have been working in your groups, and in your groups you would have been working three different roles within your groups. Communicators, lead coder, lead debugger, and all that. And you'd all be changing roles as you went through the different 4 ALTs. And then by the time you got to this time now, when you go off and branch off to do your own ALT for your project, you'd have all those skill sets. That's the agile methodology that we were trying to build. Of course, COVID put an end to all that. Of course, it does have a number of downfalls. I mean, the customer is going to be key in this, because the feedback loop from the customer will feed into how you're changing it. Disadvantages. Okay, so I put the disadvantages maybe in purple. Okay, you know, you need good members of teams. No, in other words, you can't have a weak link in a team, because if they're all doing the same thing at the same time to different teams, then one leak in one team drags that team down. Okay, there's a lot of time commitment involved. This is not just do your job and then you move on to another job. This is constantly working on the same job. Okay, one of the big problems is that while they're focusing on getting through the problems and go building and developing, they can sometimes leave the foundations an awful lot of times, and that can lead to problems, especially with software development. That can lead to bugs being built into the system unintentionally. Okay, because the speed at which the agile is going at can sometimes mean that you're not dotting every I and crossing every T before you move on, and that can cause trouble. And it also causes trouble if you need I need a pen that does this, this, and this. If you need a pen, this is a great way to do it. But if you need a very specific type of pen that does a specific type of thing, this is not necessarily the best way to go about it. Okay, so there's some subtle little kind of negatives about it, for want of a better word, in terms of how the cycle would work. But let's just try to draw it over here. So it's an endless arrow. So you've got, you get the requirements. You get the requirements from the client, and then you plan, and then you design, and then you develop, and then you release, and then you track and monitor. Okay, so, and this constantly keeps happening. So by the time you're tracking and monitor, you're looking at the requirements for what's gone wrong in this phase, plan for the new phase, design for the new phase, develop for the new phase, release, track and monitor. And this is constantly happening. Overlapping teams are constantly doing this. Okay, but you can see where this has caused problems, because they're constantly having to do this, and there's nobody really checking that everything is perfect before you move and transition on to the next cycle of design and development. Okay, so that can cause quite a lot of issues. Okay, you can see that it is a tough one. Okay, I'm going to think there's other kind of issues that might come up, but they're probably the main issues. Okay, so we'll have a look at Scrum next, I suppose. So Scrum. Scrum is kind of a subset of Agile. Okay, again, it's iterative. Okay, it's cyclical. Okay, now the difference is you've got fixed lengths of the iterations called sprints. Okay, and they're usually in 1 to 2 week blocks. Okay, so what happens is, I suppose, you think of the one we just had. You think this. Okay, so what will happen is that you'll do the first thing. You do the planning. Okay, 1 to 2 weeks, and then you stop. Everyone stops, and you have your kind of debrief, and then you push again, another 1 to 2 weeks for the next stage, and push again for the next stage. Okay, now you can still go back at any stage, and it is iterative, so this will, but you're pausing every so often. This is with the Scrum idea. You're pushing a little bit, push a little bit. Okay, what it allows for is it allows in these little breaks in between your kind of in between your pushes. It allows for that transparency and the visibility of the project, so you're getting a little kind of a chance to kind of smell what's going on. Okay, it also means that at each stage the team is responsible. Okay, so the team gets to speak at each of these stages, which I mean, you're not waiting for the very end before a team can report back. You're getting more responsibility for the team at more stages of the process. Okay. It means it's a lot more easy to accommodate changes because there's more natural breaks than in the full cycle. Okay, you definitely increase in cost savings because you got smaller little increments, and it makes it easier to kind of contend with any kind of problems that might arise. There are some difficulties you can see with it. Okay, because again, because this is a kind of a subset of Agile, because there's no real end date in here, these scrums can go on a long time. So you get what's called scope creep, where things just, they keep being pushed out and out and out, and you don't get any kind of finish to the cycle. It just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. Again, like any other Agile, there's a time commitment involved here. Okay. The leadership issues come into problems here because you've got such short windows of iteration, 1 to 2 weeks. It can be poorly defined, and you really need kind of someone who's going to project manage it in a way that allows it to flow naturally, but at the same time knows when to step in at the various iterations in order to change or fix something or, do something else. Again, roles are super important. Okay. It's very hard to kind of visualize how it is, but you can look at it like this. You could have 2 weeks, then another 2 weeks, then another 2 weeks, then another 2 weeks, and then you could go right back to the start. So, each of these little stages could be a 2-week stage. So you could get 2 weeks to get to there. Okay. You could have another 2 weeks to get to there. Another 2 weeks to get to there. That could be your end product, and then you might recycle the whole thing and go back to the start. But as this gets stretched out, it gets harder to kind of understand it. Okay, you get backlog, you get other issues like that. So as a kind of a methodology, harder version than Scrum, even though it's a subset of Scrum, but it's probably more efficient if it's done right than Agile is. Okay. And the last one we're going to talk about, Waterfall. Okay, so Waterfall. Okay, Waterfall is the opposite end of the scale. It's probably the one we're most familiar with. Okay, it's sequential and it's linear. Okay, and it's the most popular version. Going right back to Henry Ford. Person A does job A. Person B does job B. Person C does job C. Person D does job D. That type of thing. Okay. You've got a start and an end date for each task. Once one of the stages is complete, the development team moves on to the next stage. Team can't go back to a previous stage without starting the whole process from the beginning. That type of mentality. Okay. And before the next team can move on, the requirements are reviewed and approved by the customer. So you've got this, I'll try and put it all into kind of a nice visual for you. So you can start with requirements, and then that flows down to design, which flows down to implementation. Use different words here, but they all mean the same thing. Verification, maintenance. So there's no iteration here. It doesn't go back to the start. Okay. There's lots of stages. Okay. The conception stage with the idea, the initiation, once it's kind of, you get your project team, you get your objectives, your scope, your purpose, your deliverables, then requirements gathering, the analysis, the design, the implementation, the coding, the testing, the maintenance. They'll often require back-end stuff. Now, you can see what the advantages of this is, and there are. Okay, it's ridiculously easy to implement and to manage. Okay, it's all has to be done at each stage. So you can have 5 people do the job instead of 5 people in one team. You have 5 separate people. They're that job. They don't all have to be in the same place. That's the other thing. Okay, you can have one fella in Bangalore, another fella in Bangor, another fella in Dublin, another fella in Dubai. Okay, so they don't have to be working that way together. Okay. Okay, discipline is enforced. Okay, every phase in the waterfall has a start and an end point. It's easy to share progress with the stakeholders and the customers. You know what I mean? So they know at each stage what's going on. It's more delineated in terms of a process than, let's say, the Agile or the Scrum, where everything's all mixed matched and you have multiple teams doing bits of the whole at the same time. So it's very hard to get someone to talk to the customer saying this is where we're at, because you have multiple teams trying to do it at the same time. Okay, you get well documented and you get less bugs, you get less errors, because everything's checked and double checked before the next stage goes on. Okay, what's the big problems with it? Big problems with it, if the customer changes their mind, you have to go right back to the start. Okay, the software doesn't get delivered until it's right at the end of development. So there's none of this stuff like with the Agile or Scrum where you can release the software and then just patch it up in one of the other iterations, which is what happens nowadays. You can see it. Think of the most recent one, diddly diddly do, Cyberpunk. Okay, they had awful problems on the PS5, was it? And why was it? Because the methodology they used meant that they released it before it was totally done, because they knew well they'd patch it up in later patches, because they were using an iterative model of design. Okay, if you use this model design, it'd probably be 10 more years before we see the bloody thing out, but it would be perfect when it does come out. Okay, and you can see that's been a change in computer design, especially computer games design, the last couple of years. It moved from a waterfall method where the final release is the final release. There's no patches, there's no bugs, there's no nothing in it, to this more iterative process like the Agile or the Scrum. But the problem is you're having to patch the crap out of it. Okay, okay. So they're the disadvantages of it, you know, and the advantages, I suppose, one way or the other. You need to be able to at least compare and contrast two types. Personally, I would just go Agile versus Waterfall. They're the two most distinct types. Okay, learn a bit of a kind of spiel about both of them, and you should be grand. Okay, there is plenty online to help you out with that, but there's a kind of a concrete kind of a explain it like I'm a 5-year-old type of idea about it. Okay, thank you very much.